Welcome once again to the Only You English version of Solitude podcast, where we discuss mental health and wellness. Vince here in the studios, Dr. Patino in his office. This week's subject is something, quite frankly, I'm not particularly well versed in. I am not a social media guy. Many moons ago, I had a MySpace account. Of course, I have Facebook, and that's pretty much it. However, my wife and her kid, it's constantly bing, 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 back and forth, all sorts of stuff. TikTok, Instagram, and in particular, the Instagram is the one that has a lot of interest out there. It seems to be the hot social media. And as you shared with me earlier today, quite a few articles written on the effects of these social media platforms on our children, in particular teenagers.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you again for listening to us and to get involved in these topics that we I find fascinating. I mean, I know that Vince considers himself not a media person, even though he's in the media right now. So,
Well,
so I think he's by default he has become a media personality. So, and that's a good thing. I think that we have something going here. And thank you to all of you for allowing us to have something going. Now, a lot has been written in the recent past, lots of news, lots of noise about the media platforms and the effects on children, right? And all of this kind of came to fruition recently because we had uh, a whistleblower that used to work for Facebook that I used to be somewhat involved with some research, and she basically kept some of the research and she's been volunteering to the media and to Congress her opinion about that research. Now,
you
go
said
ahead.
something interesting. You said opinion, even though there's research and data.
Exactly. So here's where it gets complicated because we're basically talking about social scientific research, right? And this is data that was collected by Facebook, which is the owner of Instagram, looking at the risk benefit of the platform in terms of kids, right? Uh, the data was not ever developed as a placebo controlled research study to look at um, statistical significant data, right? To see if we have I don't know, thousand children from Africa that have never participated in social media, and you have the people in social media. How do the groups compare when you stabilize them and standardize them and all of that? So the reason I use the word opinion is because it's her interpretation of the data,
Hmm.
right? Interestingly enough, if you start looking at the data, she's only interpreting the negative data. She's not interpreting the positive data. And I have to say this because I need to be careful. I'm not sitting here trying to defend Instagram or social media. I'm just making a criticism of how we tend to split data to feed our narrative, right? So when she pulls it out of Facebook and takes it into Congress and the SEC and she starts giving opinions, right? Then she's interpreting the data. It is for scientists to interpret the data, okay? And I can assure you that it's unlikely that Facebook developed this data to try to find out if their platform was good or bad for kids, right? So, all of that said, we can say that there are people who are vulnerable. And we've talked about this many times. And my bias in terms of social media is not that I don't like it, for God's sake. I am speaking in social media right now. But I'm also not a big fan of social media for children without supervision. So when we start looking at her opinion, we have to also consider the facts, right? And the facts are not limited to Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp or TikTok or any of the platforms over the world. There are social issues related to participation in social media, okay, and the inability of our brain to process the amount of data, right? And the amount of data, independent of platform, can be overwhelming for certain people, not for all people, right? So those who are vulnerable to being overwhelmed probably have certain characteristics, and we have to do more research on identifying who are the most vulnerable people to social media, right? I mean, I can tell you that I do get to see a lot of kids in the hospital. Before this, you were listening, you know, to one of my conversations without knowing it and who were we talking about. Well, basically, children who are anxious, suicidal, homicidal, psychotic, right? So that can fall into a lot of different categories. A lot of attention was paid, okay, to the issue of self-image, right? And social media. How social media, based on the opinion of this person, makes people develop a poor self-image.
Mm,
That's a pretty strong opinion, I have to say, because it neglects the history of that individual prior to joining social media, right? So, from my perspective, as a psychiatrist and somebody who treats adolescents every day, I have to look back at how did the patient get from point A to point B, and that doesn't start with social media. It
mm,
starts with a lot of stuff, right? Whether it's temperament biologically, mental illness, parenting issues, abuse, neglect, and then you keep going from there, right? So we have to be more cognizant of the fact that the kids get to social media with baggage, right? And those kids that have a lot of baggage are likely to be more vulnerable. So, yes, I see kids that come into the hospital with eating disorders, with anxiety disorders, with panic attacks, with victimization because of bullying that happens in social media. But it's very similar to what happens with PTSD, right? And you know about that because you work a lot with people in the military. Not everybody who gets exposed to the same experience in battle gets PTSD.
mm.
And those who develop PTSD, not all of them develop at the same intensity and frequency of symptoms, right? So there are vulnerabilities, some of them biological, some of them psychological, some of them social, that lead the person to vulnerabilities, right? So it's important, I think, to keep that in mind.
Yeah, so a sweeping generalization that hey, social media is bad for kids is really uh, very much inaccurate when it comes to that because you have to look at all the data, look at the positive sides, which I believe that was not mentioned. She didn't say anything about the positive aspects because you sent me an article earlier today that actually said that some of these responses said that social media was a positive force in these people's lives.
Well, when you look at other studies, Facebook is one study. You look at other studies. There's a study that was done in teens in 2021, and about 43% reported that they being social media make them feel better, made them feel probably that they belong into something. Okay, so but that's very typical of the non-scientific research and opinion when we're trying to um, make a statement about badness, right? And the point is that we tend to look at teenagers as static, right? And we need to look at teenagers as being in a state of evolution of a process that again has biological, psychological, and social characteristics. And then we have to look at those who are able to adapt to the process because they have certain biological, psychological, and social strengths, and the ones who are not. Okay. The issue really is that, you know, the horse is out of the barn.
Mm.
I mean, we're having a discussion about nuances of something that we should have dealt with 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So, social media is a reality, right? And now we're trying to find the guilty parties responsible for those vulnerable having more problems, right? With the assumption that if there was no social media, they wouldn't have the problems, which
which
is
is
not
which
necessarily
is
the case.
inaccurate. Yeah, it's a blame game at this point.
Exactly. So what happens is, and I haven't gotten into this yet, but my bias again, my concern is, where are the parents? Where is the parent responsibility in the development of their children? So there's a parallel, I believe, that goes between parental responsibility and supervision, right? And the development of healthy, non vulnerable children.
Mm,
And if you look at social media, well, the parents are also on social media, right? They're high consumers of social media. So the newer generations of parents, okay, kind of have become afraid of rules, afraid of the responsibility of parenting. Okay. So we having some kids that have been chronically neglected, that have been dumped into having social media raise them.
mm.
So I think that we need to look at society in general, okay, parenting and purpose.
You say social media is parenting them. I remember, in my day, kids would be thrown in front of the TV, right? And we would watch TV. You're being raised by television. Things were maybe a little bit more wholesome then, except for the crazy violence on, the morning cartoons that we saw. But we knew, yeah, that those things weren't real. Now, though, they have so much more data. They have so much more information and so many more different medias. But they also have the ability to put parental controls on all of those. Is that correct?
That is correct. Parental controls have always existed. In my time, in your time, well, your parents will turn off the TV, and yes, you will throw a tantrum, and then your parents will deal with your tantrum. Okay, and then you will go outside and play or do something else. For some reason, we have bought into the idea that there's nothing we can do about social media,
Mm,
right? And we have not utilized social media as a means of behavior modification because it's too easy, right? It's too easy to give somebody a tablet. It's too easy to give your teenager a phone. I mean, I'm probably very old fashioned, but I still ask, why does a 12 or 13-year-old needs a phone? And the answer I get invariably from the parents is, because we want to know where they are.
mhm.
Okay,
That's
okay.
that's Steve Jobs' tracking
Eh,
device.
exactly. So we need to stop fooling ourselves with the idea that we have answers, right? And we have to take like a 30,000 eagle view of the whole society in the context of social media, and how can we facilitate adaptation, because most of the complications of social media is really inability to adapt to the speed of communication, to the quickness of communication, to the quickness of imaging, and constantly changing, right? Because it doesn't allow you to firmly develop a self, meaning, who am I? Where do I belong? Where am I going? Right? It's like you get thrown into this world of social media, and now you have to basically follow. Okay. And if you really think about it, the ones who tend to be more successful are the ones who either develop, adapt, or lead in
Mm,
the process of social media, right? And there's people who can do that, but there are people who are going to be left behind. And then we're going to continue trying to figure it out. Who do we blame now? How did we never asked the question, how did we get here? We always jump that question into, how do we fix this?
mm,
And my question is, what? How do we fix what? Right? I mean, yes, Congress is going to talk. Congress is going to have a conversation with the major firms. Okay, but they're not going to do anything. I mean, we've been talking about this for 10 years. We were talking about regulation. What is regulation going to accomplish? It's going to give us better parents? Is going to give us less vulnerable kids? No, none of that. So it becomes extremely important that we go back to a very basic principle, two words: values and purpose. What is the purpose of raising our kids? And what values are we giving our kids so they can defend themselves from the world? And if you think about it, we've lost purpose and then we overprotect.
Mm. Yeah, and it seems that this blame game of trying to point out a larger scale villain really is just kind of an illusion. Everyone has to take personal responsibility. So, to these parents who maybe are aware of this or concerned for their children, what are the steps that some parents can take to help, um, I guess, ameliorate this issue or at least to protect their child and a little bit more from this evil of social media?
Well, I think that there are a number of things, and we have to look at where the parents are and where the kids are, right? Because kids tend to have different needs at different stages of development. So I think it becomes extremely important that we provide the parents with the idea and the empowerment that they are the owners of their kids,
Mm,
right? And I have to tell because I deal with kids and adolescents ages 11 to 17 every day in the hospital, the most severely vulnerable kids. And there's a lot of trauma in a lot of these kids. There are kids that don't have as much trauma, but they have a lot of neglect. But there's a common denominator with them, and is that they haven't been given the tools to feel secure, meaning that they can make choices, right? So, by us becoming in the last 15, 20 years excessively protective and helicopter parenting our kids, we have taken we have removed their ability to learn how to, right? So, if the kid gets bullied, it's catastrophic.
mm,
If the kid doesn't get a prize for losing a soccer game, it's tragic. I mean, we're trying to democratize the development of children, and you cannot do that because the raising of your kids is totally autocratic. I mean, there's no concept of democracy. I mean, and I don't want to sound terribly harsh. I'm not in favor of abusing kids. I'm not in favor of spanking the kids. I'm not in favor of hitting them in the head or shaming them or any of that stuff, right? But I am in favor of calculated frustration. I am in favor of challenging the kids so they can find answers, right? But nowadays, if you tell a parent that there is a problem with your child, the parent will fight you.
oh, yes.
How dare you tell me that I made a mistake as a parent? I'm not saying you made a mistake as a parent. I'm saying there's a problem with your child, right? So, I mean, a lot of my older friends will say, when I was little, if the school called my parents, they will come, and my mom would always side with the teacher. It doesn't have to go to that extreme, but the parents have lost the ability to listen to what the critic is saying. And it's not criticism about you, and the criticism has a purpose. If I tell you that your kid is a bully, don't fight with me, right? I'm giving you evidence and facts why your kid is a bully, okay? And don't tell me that I'm going to traumatize your kid because I'm saying that the kid's a bully.
Hmm.
Can we be on the same page to figure out how to help your kid not be a bully? Wouldn't that be a good purpose? And by the way, what are the values that lead you to help that kid? You know, you see, if I tell a parent your kid is aggressive and is violent and is making threats toward you, and he needs some serious behavior modification, and the parent starts modeling to me the same behavior that the kid's manifesting toward me, right? Then I have to say, is this parent capable of modifying this kid's behavior,
mm,
right? So there's a lot of training that I think is required. Now, I do have to say this. I would say that 80-90% of parents are very well intentioned. Most of them are doing a good job. Most of them are developing healthy kids, right? Insecure but healthy kids. Let me say it that way. Less secure than 3 generations ago.
mm,
Lots of doubts, lots more anxiety, but balanced to some degree, right? But then we have a lot more parents who are either neglectful or abusive, or excessively protective of the kids. So it's not that you should not protect your kids, it's that you shouldn't protect them that much.
mhm,
Okay. And again, we have to look at ourselves as society, how we have grown to be afraid. And we, there's a direct correlation between growing as a society, being afraid, and being bored, right?
mm,
Because if you don't have to wake up in the morning and go to find the food you're going to eat, and make sure that you have shelter and make sure that your clan is safe, you have a lot of free time. You have a lot of free time to think a lot about a lot of stuff, right? So industrialized societies, since the industrial revolution 250 years ago, have grown, okay, to be more anxious, more afraid, okay, less natural, if you may. So my concern with newer generations is that they're losing their instinct, right, for immediate gratification without any ability to measure danger.
mm.
I mean, it's like the empty Superman phenomenon. It's like I'm Superman, so but underneath you're so weak, and that's what narcissism is all about, right? Nothing will ever happen to me.
So on the negative side, are we raising or inadvertently raising a whole generation of narcissists?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah, I see a lot more of that, but not in the context of everybody being grandiose, but everybody being empty. So let me give you some examples of narcissism. Everybody looks at the grandiosity, aloofness. I'm the best in the world. But what I look for is the sensitivity to criticism, the sensitivity to rejection, the emptiness, the loneliness. Okay. That needs to be hidden from the rest of the world by being a narcissist, right? But that is very dangerous because um, that creates rage. And we're seeing a lot of rage in the last 10 years, right?
hmm. A lot of
Okay.
tantrums out there.
But a lot of the tantrums are the result of fear. So if you asked me a question a minute ago and it had to do with what do we tell parents? Well, parents understand that you don't have all the answers and identify your kids' assets and vulnerabilities. Okay. Help them with the assets, recognize the vulnerabilities, but don't shame them for them.
Mm,
So a healthy person is somebody who grows as a child and as an adolescent with a balance of praise and frustration. Okay. We kind of gone too far into the and protection side, and we have forgotten how to frustrate our kids. I mean, to the point that, I mean, sometimes I go to a restaurant, and one of the parents is trying to teach the kid a lesson, that something was wrong, and is doing it in a healthy way, and the other parent starts fighting with the other parent about why you're shaming the kid when it wasn't really shame. So we have, as parents, whether you're single parent or a couple parent, you have to be on the same page. You have to understand that you kids are your 100% responsibility they become adults. They don't have the same rights that adults do. Okay. I mean, they have the right to be safe, to have a place to live, to be educated, to have food on the table, to have proper clothing, right? Outside of that, everything is a responsibility,
mm,
all right? But every single kid that I see every day thinks that everything else is an entitlement.
mm,
They deserve it. I mean, I get kids that come to the hospital suicidal because one of the parents took away their cell phone. And then it's like they're saying, "How dare my mom takes away my cell phone?" And I said, I used a technique called paradoxical intention, which do the opposite of what the kid expects me to do. And I said, well, what if I tell you it's not your cell phone? What if I tell you that everything you own, you don't own, is owned by your parents, right? So what have you done to earn it?
mm,
Nothing. My mom has to give me back my cell phone. I said, well, you didn't get it. It's not your cell phone. Because if you're telling me that, if you're telling me that I should tell your mom to give you your cell phone so you don't kill yourself, I'm not going to do that because it's not your cell phone. But because of convenience, right, it's a lot easier to give them a cell phone and forget about it. And then 6 months later, you want to take it away. So why don't we start by saying, okay, I mean, parents ask me this all the time. They have a 12, 13-year old and they tell me, should I give my kid a cell phone? And I said, well, what would the kid have to do to earn it?
mm.
Right? So why don't we start a process of the kid establishing certain patterns of behavior by which they earn the phone, and then you establish the pattern of behavior that will remove the phone. So if the kid wants to go out when it's 15 years old and you tell him you have to be home by 10:30, 9:30, whatever, and he's there 5 minutes late, the kid already knows they have to give you the cell phone. You don't have to have an argument, right? And then you have to establish the behaviors that are going to help the kid get the cell phone back, right? So everything we give our kids is an opportunity to develop a mini behavior modification plan.
And really, if we're using it as a tool that way, these social media platforms with Instagram, Facebook, and the right can be used in the same way. You get access to this because of these behaviors. If this occurs, you get it taken away.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with social media in that context is that there's a lot of influence from the group, right? So you start feeling bad because the parent of the other child is not doing the same thing. So we have to convince the kids that we're doing the behavior modification that is good for them. You see, we forget that the purpose of raising our kids is to give them tools for the rest of their life. It's not about our narcissism. It's not about our self-esteem. It's not about, oh, how great of a job I did. My kid's is an attorney or he's a doctor or I don't know, is a NASA scientist or whatever. No, it's very simple. Our kids are borrowed. They're temporary and they're circumstantial. We're gonna love them forever, and sometimes we're gonna like them, and sometimes we don't. But we're gonna love them forever. But we're teaching them and giving them tools for their life, not for our life, right? If we're vicariously living our own self-esteem to our kids, that's
Mm.
not healthy for them.
As a coach, I've seen that a lot on the sidelines. Parents screaming, yelling, trying to relive their glory days or however many years they did not play the game through their child.
And you know, and I tell this to my students, I tell this to my associates, other doctors and nurse practitioners that work with me. I always say, it's never about me. It's never about the parents coming and saying, "Oh, Doctor Patino, how great of a job you did. You're the best psychiatrist." It's not about that.
Hmm.
Yeah, of course that feels good, but it's not about that. It's about the kid. It's about how the kid's getting better tools. So when it comes out into the next chapter of the movie, it's less dramatic and less intense and more adaptive. That's it. It's not it's not a game of self-esteem,
Hmm.
but the kids getting to this, and social media has really exponentially increased the influence of the group. And we have to remember, adolescents developmentally care more about their group than their family. It's just part of the development because they're in the process of separation. The process of adolescence is for the kids to start practicing being adults, right? But we're so afraid that they practice being themselves that we start putting restrictions on the risk taking
Mm.
when we should be helping them develop some healthy protective mechanisms, some healthy ways of communicating with other people, and first and foremost, being able to recognize danger.
And it
Right?
sounds like really these platforms could actually be a practice venue for that. That's not physically dangerous, even though there's some issues on there. To learn those the danger signs, to learn some responsibility, and to work with the parents to do that. Of course, if you're a parent that has a child that has some social, biological, and psychological risks, be aware of that and start making some steps to help protect them, but not overly so.
Exactly. And just to end this, it's extremely important that we recognize that we're not this I mean, social media is not going anywhere. It is here. How do we become how do we embrace it in a way that that 43-50% that feels better with it, that we can increase it in positive ways?
Mm.
Okay. If the idea is, do we have to do something so they nobody watches social media, it's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen now because it's not possible. Somebody can just turn off the switch of the internet and create chaos, right? But short of that, we have to live with it. Can we live with it more adaptively? And the answer is yes, we can. But it requires the participation of everybody. This is not an issue of social media and the kids. This is an issue of social media and society, and how can we facilitate our adaptation into the process so our kids can get something positive from it, right?
You know, when TV first came out, it was all about education, turned to other things. Social media is significantly the same way. We can use it
Absolutely.
as a tool for good and a tool for bad. Parents out there, start educating yourself on this and see what we could do to make social media not this evil that's floating around, but for a great benefit that it was originally designed for.
Hey, thank you very much, Vince. We'll see you again next week.
Wonderful. Take care. And everybody, remember, like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.